Welcome to God is Open. I am your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on God is Open, we're going to be talking about the life, the times, the legacy of King Cyrus the Great, who he was as a person, the king of the Persians, a figure often mentioned within the Bible, but a lot of times Christians don't know anything about his backstory, and so they make all sorts of weird claims about it. So we're right now turned to Isaiah 45. This is a very critical passage because traditional conservative Christian scholarship claims that this passage was written by Isaiah and written by Isaiah about Cyrus, naming him by name about 200 years in advance of King Cyrus. King Cyrus is operating in about the 550 BCs, and this passage in Isaiah may be written around the 740s BC. So hundreds of years before Cyrus existed, his name's being mentioned in the book of Isaiah. Myself, I do not take this view. I think there's pretty clear indicators within Deutero-Isaiah that Deutero-Isaiah was just written in the Isaiah tradition, and it's pretty obviously written concurrently with King Cyrus and written to the people at that time. Things happen, like God declares new things to these people that have never before been declared. That doesn't work if it's written 200 years prior to these people. They've already been declared a long time ago. No, there's new things being declared to the people who are alive at the time of Cyrus. This is written in the time of Cyrus. But for sake of argument tonight, we will pretend that Isaiah is a predictive prophecy naming King Cyrus by name. What would it take to have King Cyrus named King Cyrus? Well, who was King Cyrus? Was he always named King Cyrus? Where did he even get his name? Who is this man? On a quick side note, when you pull up King Cyrus's name in Ezra, guess who Ezra cites as having prophecy fulfilled about Cyrus? Is it Isaiah? It's not Isaiah. It's Jeremiah. Isaiah is not cited because Isaiah does not exist as a prophecy when Ezra is written. Ezra 1:1. Now in the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia. So he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. So Cyrus is fulfilling God's promises to bless, to grow, to give Israel back their land made within Jeremiah. It's not citing Isaiah because Isaiah is a current command to a current king who exists, and it's not existing to be cited by Ezra. But I have pulled up here a map of the ancient world, and you see the kingdom of the Medes, and it stretches from about the midpoint of modern-day Turkey, stretches through Iraq, through all of Iran, and then into Afghanistan. You see the kingdom of Persia is in the southern part of modern-day Iran. Babylonia is a thin strip right below the kingdom of the Medes and has Israel as part of its territory. Another significant kingdom is the kingdom of Lydia, which makes up the western half of modern-day Turkey. They will figure into our story. Let's start with them. So there's a king named Croesus, and he's the king of Lydia. Now his dynasty he wants to secure, and so he goes through some ritual acts and then reaches out to all the various oracles. The oracles at Delphi are able to tell him what he did in secret, so he trusts them with messages, and he starts asking them a series of questions. And one of the questions is like, how long am I going to reign? And their message back to them is that you will reign as long as there is not a mule on the throne of Media. When the Medes have a mule as a king, just then tender-footed Lydian by the stone-thrown Hermes, flee and do not stay, and do not be ashamed to be a coward. And so he rejoices in this message because to him that means he will never lose the throne because the Medes will never have a mule as a king. But what he doesn't understand is that the mule being referred to is Cyrus. Now, why is Cyrus a mule? What is a mule? It's a hybrid between a donkey and a horse. It's a mixed offspring. So who is Cyrus? So there was a king of the Medes at the time, Astyages, and he has a daughter. And he has a dream about this daughter that she urinates and it floods the world. And he thinks that this is very concerning. And so what do you do with that information. Well, I gotta get rid of my daughter. How about I'll marry her off to a lowly Persian? And then the Persians were seen as lower class, lower status, and so he'll just make the problem go away by marrying her down social strata. He does that, but then he has another dream in which vines come from her womanly parts and spread over the world, for which he takes to mean that whatever offspring she has is going to inherit and conquer the world. And his dream interpreters also state as such. And so what happens? She becomes pregnant. He calls her back to his palace. She gives birth, and then he tasks one of his generals with killing this child. And so something happens which is repeated often in mythology in so many different circumstances. What we could take a look at a few parallel stories. But what happens is this general is tasked with killing this child, but he himself hands it off to a shepherd, a cow herder, in order to take care of this. And that cow herder in turn raises young Cyrus as his own. So let's look at the story. The king says, whatever I tell you to do, you need to do without fail, or else you will be punished exceedingly terribly. This general is Harpagus. Harpagus takes the child home, but then starts talking to his wife. You got problems here. So you got a child of a prince and a daughter. The king is old. The king doesn't actually have any offspring. And so it's very likely that this daughter is going to inherit the entire land. And if that happens, he's going to be in trouble because he just killed her daughter. And so he has to get rid of this child in a way where he's not the person who is killing the child. He says, hey, I know this cow herder. I'm going to call him in, and I'm going to give him the child, and he's going to expose the child and let the child die by just natural weather conditions and neglect, and the child will be dead, and that problem will be taken care of. I can wash my hands. I'm not involved in this murder. He calls this cow herd in, gives him the kid, gives him the tasking, and the cow herder goes back to his wife. Meanwhile, his wife at home was pregnant and ready to give birth, and while he was away, she gave birth, but it was a stillborn baby. It was a dead baby. She takes a look and she sees this kingly, well-genetic child, golden and happy and alive with passion, and she says, here's what we need to do. We need to raise this kid as our own, and if they need a dead child, we'll take our dead child, and you could use that body to show them. But we're not going to kill this kid. She says, hey, we could both benefit. Our baby can have a royal burial, and their baby gets to live. It's a win-win situation all around. The shepherd agrees, and they decide to raise King Cyrus as their own, under a different name. He's not named King Cyrus. Herodotus, whose story we're reading, mentions that several times. He's not currently named Cyrus. This is not his original name. So Cyrus starts growing up. He's about 10 years old, and the village children, they're all playing a game in which they appoint kings, and their king is King Cyrus. Of course, he's got the kingly genetics. His temperament shows, as Herodotus writes, that he has a commanding presence. They all love and adore him, and so he starts giving commands. And guess what? There's a nobleman's kid who doesn't want to obey, and so Cyrus has him whipped. Now the nobleman's child complains to the noble, who goes and complains to the king, and the king says, send me this shepherd's boy, this cowherder's boy, and let me examine this guy, and then he'll get what he deserves. When the boy comes to Astyages, he speaks with confidence and speaks with authority, and he looks to be about the right age and looks like Astyages. Astyages says, I think this is my kid. And so he calls the cowherder in, questions him, finds the truth of the matter, then calls his general in and has his general confess, and then says, everything turned out well. It turns out that my dream about the vines was all about the kids calling him king. Myself, I'm not going to be overthrown as the king by this child, because that already happened in the village play in which Cyrus was named king. And all the dream interpreters, to their later regret, they also agree with this interpretation, and they let him go. But Astyages is not as forgiving as he makes off. His general Harpagus, he says, everything's going good. We need to make some sacrifices to the gods. Send your 13-year-old son here, and so that we can make those sacrifices and prepare a feast for tonight. So he sends his 13-year-old son, this general who saved the life of Cyrus by giving it to the cowherd. The king takes this son, kills him, cooks him up, and then serves him to his father for dinner at that banquet. And then he reveals it to him. He says, hey, the meat that you're eating, did you like it? And Harpagus says, yes. He says, oh, have some more. He hands him the basket with his dead son's head and hands in it. And what are you going to do? Harpagus has to play along. He has to say, whatever you do, I agree with. Herodotus writes, and when Harpagus seems to have eaten his fill, Astyages asked him, do you like your meal, Harpagus? Exceedingly, Harpagus answered, and then those whose job it was brought him the head of his son and the hands of the feet concealed in the basket, and they stood before Harpagus and told him to open and take what he liked. Harpagus did, and he opened and saw what was left of his son. He saw this, but mastered himself and did not lose his composure. And so this is actually a very manly characteristic, holding yourself back and taking vengeance later. Astyages asked him, do you know what beast's meat you have eaten? He says, I know, he said, and all that the king does is pleasing. This reminds me very much of Shakespeare's play, Titus, in which very similar things happen. There's a good movie out of Titus with Anthony Hopkins within it. It's Shakespeare's bloodiest play. Scenes like this occur within it. Harpagus is not brash, and he doesn't reveal his cards, but he holds a grudge. And he's eventually going to betray the king and destroy the king and turn the kingdom over to Cyrus. As a result, the king has undone himself in his zeal to punish and to destroy any prophecies. The king has undone himself. As often is the case for these types of scenarios, that their efforts to subvert prophecies actually come back to haunt them and carry out the prophecy. So Cyrus is sent back to his own parents, one a Persian king and one a princess of the Medes. He's a mule. He's a mixture between two different peoples. And now he's going to be raised and groomed within the royal court. He becomes a very trusted cupbearer for King Astyages and becomes very much trusted within the realm. To increase the myth of Cyrus, guess what myth is circled around? That while he was being exposed, he suckled on a wolf or a dog while he was in the wild, much like the founding of Rome. And so this is another myth reported by Herodotus in his own myth about the childhood of King Cyrus. King Cyrus suckled at a wolf. So King Cyrus grows up, and Harpagus still holds a grudge. He writes to Cyrus, conceals that message within a dead rabbit, and sends it to him. Basically a message saying, hey, I've been raising support for you. I've been getting everyone on board. Why don't you rebel against your father, the king, your grandfather, the king? And Cyrus does. Cyrus calls all the Persians together. He has them work one day and feast the next. Asks them which one that they would rather prefer. They would rather prefer feasting, it turns out. And he says, you better follow me or you will be working the rest of your lives. And so they all decide to follow him in revolt. And guess what? Astyages, this is like a decade later, he doesn't remember his slight to Harpagus. And so he takes him and appoints him the general of his armies. And so when they go out to battle, Harpagus betrays him. He doesn't support the fighting, and Astyages retreats back to his city. And now all he has is old men and young children. He tries to mount a defense, but he's overthrown. And there's an excellent scene in which Harpagus confronts Astyages and says, it was me who betrayed you. It was me who rose your son to destroy you because you killed my son. It says, Astyages asks, do you imagine that this, which Cyrus has done, is your work? And then he says, it was I, said the other, who wrote the letter The accomplishment of the work is rightly mine. It's like, I did this to you, and you get to see it before your death, your entire livelihood crumpled down. He's laughing at him, saying, you are now a slave, Mr. King. You killed my kid. Then said Astyages, you stand confessed, the most foolish and most unjust man on earth, most foolish in giving another the throne which you have had for yourself. If the present business is indeed your doing, most unjust, in enslaving the Medes because of this banquet. For if in any event any other, and not you, had to possess the royal power, then in justice some Mede should have it, not a Persian. The king is mad. He's like, you just betrayed your own people to get back at me. You yourself could have been king, but you didn't take it. Now you have just enslaved all your people. I don't think Harpagus cares about that. I think he cares more about the vengeance, the revenge. And he becomes one of Cyrus's trusted generals to fight the Lydians. The Lydians come back in our story. This is the famous Oracle of Delphi, where the king says, hey, if I go to war with this Cyrus guy, am I going to win? And the Oracle of Delphi says, yes, a great kingdom will be destroyed if you go to war. What he didn't understand was it was his own kingdom being destroyed. So what happens is he invades. Cyrus comes and confronts him, fights him back all the way to his town, and finally takes the town, is about to sacrifice him. They're going to burn him at the stake, but he prays out to Apollo, and Apollo spares him with a rain shower. The king Cyrus sees that he's beloved by the gods, the king of the Lydians. This is Croesus, and he is enlisted into King Cyrus's army. King Cyrus is known for his mercy, his benevolence. When he invades Babylon, he's invading as a liberator. The king of Babylon has taken all the idols from all the cities and the territories and is holding them hostage. And King Cyrus comes in, liberates, and returns all the idols to their temples. Also liberates the Jews. That's part of his general amnesty. That's part of Cyrus's benevolence. Cyrus was the liberator of the Babylonians, not the invader. And so he takes over, he conquers Babylon, and then sets everyone back up correctly. All his provinces are allowed their individual gods, their individual practices. He sends out satraps to oversee and manage the territories, but he allows a lot of independence, especially when it comes to religious matters. His saving of Croesus might have come back and haunted him and bit him in the butt, because one of the versions of his death is that he is advised by Croesus to attack in a certain way when he's in a northern campaign, and that's where he ultimately meets his fate. Another legend states that he just died alone in his bed, old man, and another one, he died during combat. It could be similar to that first story that we heard, but there's several myths surrounding him. So another origin story we have is from a Greek historian, Ctesias. I don't know if I'm saying that exactly right, but he's less generous to King Cyrus. He says Cyrus was a bandit, and Cyrus didn't come from noble origins, and Cyrus, when he was the cupbearer of the king, and then overthrew the king through treachery and married the king's daughter to establish royal lineage, and in that way, that's how he came to power. Strabo has it that Cyrus then named himself after a river, and that's where he's getting the name, rather than Cyrus, the great-grandfather. Cyrus the Great, he's known as Cyrus the Second. He's the second in the noble lineage. So King Cyrus could have had bandit origins as well, and his naming of being Cyrus is just a political stunt, a political ploy, or a reference to natural landmarks in the area. So what version of events am I going to take as canon? Of course, Herodotus. Herodotus, not everything he writes is complete mythology. A lot of it is based in facts and real events. I do believe in the power of dreams and prophecy, and I think a lot of these things do play out in reality. So one thing I said I was going to do is look at how this relates to other versions of events like this throughout mythology. We are all familiar with the Oedipus complex, and this is based on Greek mythology, in which Oedipus is giving prophecies that he's going to kill his father and have carnal relations with his mother, and events play out very much like the story we see in Cyrus. We also see this in the myth of Perseus, where Perseus was attempted to be killed when he was born by his father, and then he comes back with revenge with Medusa's head and turns the entire court to stone. The king and all his followers. He turns them to stone with Medusa's head, which is said to have had those mythical powers. And so this is a reoccurring tale throughout history, which some sort of king, some sort of baby is being born, and the king seeks to subvert that child's overthrow. Much like the Jesus and King Herod story as well, King Herod tries to kill the babies to subvert Jesus eventually coming to rule to overthrow his reign. But back to the Bible and some closing thoughts. Number one, Deutero-Isaiah is not written 200 years before Cyrus, but even if it is, how can God name a baby? Well, number one, the baby was not named Cyrus. That name was given later in life, and it could have been taken up for political reasons. It could have been taken up because of geographical landmarks, and it could have been taken up by anyone who's in the role to accomplish these things. But Cyrus himself seems to have had divine protection within the story of Herodotus, in which the things that he's doing gets worked out to a particular end because he has the favor of the gods within Herodotus's own story. King Cyrus is a blessed and chosen individual for a specific mission with a destiny within his life that his life is driven towards. Within the book of Ezra, Cyrus is king at the time, and God then at that time interacts with him and stirs his heart and gets him to act. Within Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, if written concurrently with Cyrus, Cyrus becomes king, and then God moves and prophesies to get him to act in benefit of the chosen people. God is working with this individual within history. This is the only individual, a non-Jewish individual, within the Bible who is given the title of Messiah, a Christ. He's working specifically with God for the chosen people. He's their liberator, their savior. All right, so I hope this has been helpful, giving some background to King Cyrus, who he was as an individual, the mythology surrounding his origins and upbringings, and the extent to which his life was miraculous or mythological. But I would suggest watching the Kings and Generals episode on YouTube about Cyrus the Great. It doesn't have all the details that we covered tonight, but it does a good job illustrating and giving a graphical representation of what's happening on the map when these things happen, and giving an overview of King Cyrus's life. But any questions or comments, put that down below or start a thread on the God is Open Facebook group. And thank you for listening.